People once treated migraines by drilling holes straight into skulls. Parents soothed teething babies with heroin syrup and cocaine tooth drops. Roman doctors prescribed electric fish shocks for gout instead of pills. And if that sounds extreme, wait until we hit kerosene mouthwash. Across history, pain meant leeches, burning irons, mummies, even cow dung. Today, most of these cures feel more like Horizine. So why did smart people trust glowing radium water and ice pick lobotomies? Because when pain gets bad enough, almost anything starts sounding scientific. Stick around and we'll tour 39 of humanity's strangest pain fixes. Drilling holes in skulls to release headache demons. Archaeologists keep finding skulls with neat holes drilled straight through. These belong to people from ancient Peru, Europe, and North Africa. Back then, healers believed pounding headaches meant demons were trapped inside. Their fix was trepanation, literally scraping open the skull with tools. In some Andean graves, you see multiple healed holes on one skull. That means patients actually survived repeated drilling sessions without modern anesthesia or antibiotics. The logic was simple: let evil spirits and bad blood escape. In medieval Europe, surgeons sometimes used trepanation for migraines and battlefield injuries. Today, those round openings look terrifying, yet many edges show smooth healing. Heroin syrup, marketed as gentle pain relief for children. Imagine walking into a German pharmacy and seeing heroin labeled as soothing. Around the early 1900s, Bayer sold heroin syrup as a gentle cough remedy. Doctors in Europe and the United States prescribed it for pain and sleepless children. Advertisements promised it was less addictive than morphine, which sounded reassuring then. Parents gave their kids spoonfuls to quiet nighttime coughs and aches. Some early reports even praised how cheerful and calm the children seemed. Only later did doctors realize patients desperately craved more of this miracle syrup. By the 1920s, growing addiction concerns pushed regulators to clamp down hard. Heroin quietly left the pharmacy shelf and reappeared only in police reports. Cocaine toothache drops sold over the counter for kids. You know those old ads promising instant toothache relief for children and adults? Some of them literally showed bottles labeled cocaine toothache drops in bold letters. In late 19th century America, companies sold tiny vials at general stores. Parents dabbed the liquid directly on painful gums, especially during brutal teething. Cocaine numbed the nerve endings fast, so the effect felt almost magical. Newspapers ran cheerful endorsements claiming cranky kids finally slept through the night. Of course, no one mentioned the drug's powerful stimulant and dependency potential. As medical journals started reporting alarming side effects, attitudes changed rapidly. Cocaine slid from trusted household remedy to tightly controlled, legally restricted substance. Glowing radium water, touted as a miracle for arthritis. If your drink glows faintly in the dark, that's usually a warning. In the 1920s, though, radium-laced energy waters were sold as health tonics. Brands like Radithor promised to recharge tired bodies and ease arthritis and neuralgia. Wealthy businessmen, athletes, and socialites ordered crates of the radioactive bottles. Industrialist Eben Byers famously drank so much that his bones disintegrated later. Promoters claimed the tingling warmth meant the radium was stimulating your glands. Doctors initially disagreed about the risks because radiation science was still young. When jaw necrosis and anemia appeared, regulators finally pulled these waters from shelves. The glowing miracle cure ended up as a textbook nightmare of unregulated medicine. Strapping electric eels to feet to soothe gout attacks. Head to the Roman seaside with gout, and you might meet an electric fish. Physician Scribonius Largus advised placing a live torpedo ray under the aching foot. Patients stood on the damp shore until the shock numbed their leg completely. The same fish was sometimes pressed against foreheads for brutal chronic headaches. To ancient Greeks and Romans, the strange tingling felt like divine medicine. They noticed the pain fading after the jolt without understanding nerve currents. Some later writers even recommended electric fish for arthritis and melancholic moods. It sounds like fantasy therapy, but museum texts still quote Largus seriously. Today, those stories read like a prehistoric preview of electrical pain treatments. Ice pick lobotomies, advertised as a cure for chronic pain. This one feels like a horror movie, but it was real 20th century medicine. American neurologist Walter Freeman pushed the ice pick lobotomy as a quick mental cure. Freeman toured the United States in his van, nicknamed his lobotomobile, performing demonstrations. Some patients weren't just depressed, they also had severe, unexplained chronic pain. The idea was that blunting emotional response would make suffering less overwhelming. Newspapers ran upbeat stories about patients who smiled more and complained less afterward. Hidden behind those headlines were people left apathetic, disabled, or deeply changed. Once antipsychotic drugs appeared, lobotomies fell from miracle cure to medical scandal. Leech therapy for headaches, toothaches, and childbirth pain. For medieval physicians, nothing said modern treatment like a jar of hungry leeches. In Europe and the Ottoman Empire, blood-sucking worms were the multi-tool of medicine. Doctors attached them to temples for headaches and jaws for toothaches or neuralgia. During difficult childbirths, leeches sometimes went on swollen tissues to reduce perceived congestion. The theory followed humoral medicine. Pain meant too much blood or corrupted fluids. Letting leeches feed was supposed to restore balance and calm raging organs. By the 19th century, leech demand exploded so much they were nearly over-harvested. French hospitals imported millions each year to treat everything from fevers to hemorrhoids. Ironically, modern medicine has cautiously brought leeches back for delicate reconstructive surgeries. Massive bloodletting sessions to drain away migraines and aches. If leeches weren't available, doctors often reached straight for the lancet. From ancient Greece through early modern Europe, bloodletting was the default for pain. A migraine, chest pain, or inflamed joints were blamed on overloaded circulation. Physicians marked points on arms or necks, then opened veins with precise cuts. Wealthy patients might recline in special chairs, while bowls filled with warm blood. Some French nobles reportedly underwent regular seasonal bleedings, like painful health checkups. Too much enthusiasm sometimes killed people through shock or catastrophic blood loss. Critics kept warning that exhausted, pale patients weren't exactly balanced or thriving. Still, the practice survived stubbornly into the 19th century before finally fading. Bee sting cures for rheumatism, arthritis, and back pain. Imagine your doctor telling you to get deliberately stung dozens of times. In parts of Eastern Europe and Asia, bee venom therapy became a folk remedy. Healers held live bees with tweezers and pressed them against swollen joints. The short sting, then burning ache, were supposed to pull deeper pain upward. Some early 20th century Russian and German doctors even experimented with controlled injections. They hoped the venom's inflammatory jolt might rewire the immune system's behavior. Patients with rheumatism sometimes swore their stiffness eased for days afterward. Others just ended up with angry welts and zero improvement in mobility. Modern versions still exist, but researchers treat them very cautiously and skeptically. Snake venom injections given to patients with unrelenting pain. Turning one of nature's worst weapons into pain relief sounded bizarrely logical. In the 20th century, some doctors experimented with highly diluted snake venoms. They injected tiny amounts into patients with cancer pain or severe neuralgia. A few small trials reported temporary relief, which kept hope alive for years. But dosage was tricky. Too much obviously risked dangerous side effects or shock. Pharmaceutical companies eventually focused on isolated components rather than crude venoms. One famous example is a blood pressure drug originally derived from Brazilian viper. The dream of direct venom shots largely faded into niche experimental corners. Mercury ointments rubbed into skin for joint and nerve pain. Before people understood heavy metal poisoning, mercury ointments felt high-tech and sophisticated. European and Middle Eastern physicians rubbed mercury salves on aching joints and nerves. The metal's strange, shimmering quality made it seem powerful, almost alchemical to patients. Sometimes it was mixed with animal fat or herbs for better absorption. Patients reported warmth, tingling, and slight numbness where the ointment was massaged in. Unfortunately, absorbed mercury accumulated and quietly damaged kidneys and nervous systems. Chronic users developed tremors, mood swings, and the classic Mad Hatter symptoms. Despite mounting evidence, mercury preparation survived in pharmacopoeias well into modern times. Only with stricter regulations did these shiny, toxic pain cures finally disappear. Arsenic pills. Prescribed for neuralgia, menstrual cramps, and headaches. Arsenic sounds like something from a murder mystery, not a pain prescription. Yet 19th century doctors in Europe and America actually prescribed tiny arsenic doses. They believed it stimulated sluggish bodies and soothed certain nerve-related pains. Pharmacies sold arsenic-containing tonics for women with menstrual cramps and chronic headaches. Patients described a strange mix of renewed energy and reduced discomfort after dosing. Some doctors praised the rosy complexion arsenic supposedly gave their anemic patients. The dark side was cumulative toxicity, causing vomiting, weakness, and nerve damage. Because the line between therapeutic and lethal was razor thin, accidents did happen. Eventually, safer painkillers and stricter poisoning laws pushed arsenic treatments into history. Tobacco smoke enemas used for cramps, shock, and drowning victims. This one sounds like a joke until you see the museum equipment. In 18th century Europe, physicians used bellows to blow tobacco smoke into rectums. They thought nicotine's stimulant effect might revive people in shock or near drowning. Illustrations show riverbank rescuers pumping smoke into unconscious victims along the Thames. The same technique sometimes targeted abdominal cramps and severe intestinal pain. Medical kits included decorative wooden tubes and hoses for these emergency fumigations. Over time, reports of heart problems and toxicity made doctors increasingly uneasy. Once other resuscitation methods appeared, tobacco enemas rapidly looked ridiculous and dangerous. Today, they survive mostly as a punchline in histories of bad medical ideas. Red-hot irons pressed to skin to burn out pain. Long before laser therapy, healers reached for literal fire to treat pain. Cauterization meant pressing heated metal against skin above an aching area. In medieval Europe and the Middle East, surgeons used irons on joints and nerves. The intense burn was supposed to counter-irritate, distracting the body from deeper agony. Some Arabic medical texts describe specific cautery points along limbs or the spine. Patients often needed several attendants just to stay semi-still during the procedure. Horrible scars were common, but a few people reported reduced chronic pain afterward. Others simply traded invisible joint pain for lifelong sensitivity around burn marks. As anesthesia and antiseptic surgery improved, brutal cauterization gradually lost its prestige. Alcohol-soaked rags given to babies for teething pain. Picture a fussy 19th-century baby and a desperate parent reaching for whiskey. In Europe and North America, families soaked cloth in brandy or rum. They rubbed it on sore gums or let infants suck briefly on it. The alcohol numbed the tissue and made the child drowsy, sometimes very quickly. Some advice columns even suggested dipping pacifiers or spoons in strong spirits. Doctors occasionally warned about intoxicated toddlers staggering around parlors and kitchens. Still, the practice lingered well into the 20th century in some communities. Eventually, pediatricians stressed safer options and highlighted alcohol's risks to developing brains. Modern parents reading those old tips usually react with equal horror and sympathy. Laudanum-laced soothing syrups to quiet crying, colicky children. If whiskey on the gums seemed mild, laudanum syrups took it further. Laudanum was a mixture of opium and alcohol sold widely in the 19th century. Products like Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup promised relief from teething, colic, and nervousness. Labels reassured exhausted mothers that a few drops would calm almost any child. Inside the bottle, though, were opioids strong enough to sedate adults for hours. Newspaper ads rarely mentioned side effects like slowed breathing or possible dependency. Some coroners quietly documented infant deaths linked to generous dosing of these syrups. Public pressure and new regulations finally forced many opium baby cures off shelves. They remain chilling reminders of how far marketing could outrun medical understanding. Biting bullets, or leather straps as DIY battlefield anesthesia. The phrase "bite the bullet" comes from more than just colorful language. Before reliable anesthesia reached every battlefield, soldiers often faced surgery fully conscious. Surgeons handed them leather straps, wooden sticks, or literal lead bullets to clench. The idea wasn't to stop pain, just to keep them from biting tongues. Accounts from conflicts like the American Civil War describe horrifying, noisy operating tents. Men gripped whatever they could while limbs were amputated or bullets extracted. Sometimes a swig of whiskey or rum joined the improvised pain control plan. Doctors worked fast, racing infection and shock in crowded makeshift hospitals. Modern readers can hardly imagine watching a saw move while staying fully awake. Swallowing powdered Egyptian mummies for headaches and general aches. By early modern Europe, even the dead were recruited for pain relief. Apothecaries ground up supposedly ancient Egyptian mummies and sold the powder as medicine. The substance, called mumia, went into mixtures for headaches and vague bodily aches. Wealthy patients believed exotic preserved remains contained concentrated healing energies or resins. Artists and nobles in France, Germany, and England reportedly kept jars at home. Some physicians later admitted that many mummies were just dried modern corpses. There were even black market operations faking mummies to keep up with demand. As archaeology matured, scholars attacked the trade as wasteful and disrespectful, rolling in stinging nettles to distract from arthritic pain. Imagine voluntarily falling into a patch of stinging nettles again and again. In parts of Britain and continental Europe, sufferers with arthritis practiced urtication on purpose. The burning, itchy sensation briefly overwhelmed the deeper throbbing inside knees or hands. Some farmers claimed they could finally sleep after a good nettle beating. Herbalists argued the increased blood flow helped wash away whatever caused stiffness. Skeptical doctors mostly saw swollen skin and no lasting improvement in joint function. Nevertheless, personal testimonies kept the practice alive into the 20th century in villages. Modern pain specialists sometimes mention it as a striking example of intentional counter-irritation. Cow dung poultices plastered on sore backs and joints. When pharmacies were far away, people used whatever their farm produced abundantly. In rural India, Africa, and parts of Europe, cow dung poultices were common. Healers mixed fresh dung with herbs or clay, then spread it on cloth. The warm mass went over sore backs, swollen knees, or inflamed skin. Some traditions claimed the cow's purity or diet gave the mixture healing power. Others just liked the steady heat and moisture of a cheap, available compress. Of course, modern hygiene texts point out the infection risks pretty bluntly. Bacteria in manure can easily turn minor wounds into serious medical problems. Today, safer heat packs and sterile dressings have replaced these barnyard poultices. Freshly killed pigeons split and applied warm to headaches. Urban folk medicine sometimes turned city pests into portable heating pads. In early modern Europe, especially France and England, healers used freshly killed pigeons. They split the bird open and applied the warm body to a patient's head. Doctors believed the animal would draw out fever or throbbing migraine pain. Occasionally, the treatment was repeated with several birds during a single long attack. Household medical manuals described exactly where to place the carcass on the skull. Wealthier patients might substitute other small animals like rabbits, depending on beliefs. Science never confirmed any special therapeutic magic in pigeon flesh or feathers. The practice eventually vanished as cleaner, less unsettling heat therapies became widely available. Onion baked in coals, then stuffed into the aching ear. For earaches, before antibiotics, kitchens doubled as pharmacies almost everywhere. In England, Ireland, and parts of Eastern Europe, baked onion was a classic remedy. People roasted an onion in the hearth ashes until it softened and steamed. They then squeezed the warm juice, or a small piece, into the sore ear. The heat, moisture, and mild antimicrobial compounds supposedly soothed infection-related pain. Parents sat by the fire holding squirming children while applying the homemade treatment. Sometimes the smell alone probably cleared sinuses and annoyed everyone in the room. Doctors gradually replaced these onion rituals with eardrops and proper antibiotics. Still, many grandparents fondly remember onions as their family's go-to ear cure. Holding mouth over burning henbane seeds to numb tooth pain. Not all old toothache cures involved alcohol or simple herbs. Some got dangerous. Henbane, a plant loaded with hallucinogenic and toxic compounds, appears in medieval remedies. Instructions described tossing seeds on coals and inhaling the smoke through the mouth. By leaning over the brazier, sufferers bathed their gums in numbing vapors. The plant's alkaloids dulled pain, but could also cause dizziness and vivid visions. Some manuscripts warned about using too much or repeating the process too often. Yet desperate people with abscessed teeth often ignored those cautious side notes. As safer local anesthetics appeared, henbane fumigation faded from mainstream practice. Today, it lives on mostly in discussions of historic poisons and witchcraft lore. Magnet bracelets and lodestones strapped to painful limbs. For centuries, people believed magnets could pull pain out like iron filings. Ancient writers described lodestones held against aching joints to rebalance mysterious bodily forces. By the 18th and 19th centuries, magnetic bracelets and belts were big business. Advertisements promised relief from rheumatism, back pain, even menstrual cramps and headaches. Some physicians dabbled in animal magnetism, mixing science, showmanship, and suggestion. Patients often reported tingling or warmth, effects easily explained by expectation and pressure. Clinical trials much later found little difference from non-magnetic copper bracelets. Despite that, magnetic jewelry remains popular in wellness catalogs and airport kiosks. It's a perfect example of a therapy that refuses to die, despite skepticism. This next folk remedy is a checklist of everything modern doctors tell you not. In some rural parts of North America, people used kerosene or coal oil medicinally. They dabbed it on aching teeth or gargled extremely small amounts for sore throats. The burning sensation convinced them something powerful was happening to the infection. Elders later recalled the taste as unforgettable and the aftersmell nearly permanent. A few claimed dramatic overnight relief, though spontaneous improvement is common with minor ailments. Meanwhile, toxicology reports describe serious lung and nervous system damage from swallowed kerosene. Modern health campaigns strongly warn against reviving any version of this dangerous practice. It shows how far people will go when pain and distance from doctors collide. Rubbing crushed earthworms or snails onto inflamed joints. Digging through the garden wasn't always about vegetables. Sometimes it was medicine. Traditional Chinese, Arabic, and European texts mention earthworms or snails as pain remedies. Healers crushed the creatures into pastes and rubbed them onto swollen joints. Some recipes mixed the mash with wine, vinegar, or ground herbs for potency. The slime's cooling feel and slow drying might have offered temporary soothing. Insects and invertebrates often symbolized regeneration, reinforcing beliefs about tissue healing. Modern lab studies actually explore earthworm extracts for anti-inflammatory properties in purified form. Still, few patients today would volunteer for direct worm or snail poultice therapy. It's one of those practices easier to study in microscopes than kitchens. Shock therapy jolts tried on patients with mysterious chronic pain. Electricity didn't stop with fish. Eventually, it came straight from wall sockets. In the mid-20th century, some clinics tried electroconvulsive therapy on chronic pain patients. ECT was already used for severe depression, so doctors hoped for similar resets. Patients with debilitating back pain or migraines sometimes underwent a series of induced seizures. A few reported partial relief, possibly from mood shifts rather than pain pathways. Others only remembered confusion, headaches, and stigma from a controversial psychiatric treatment. As understanding grew, ECT's role narrowed to life-threatening mood disorders, not general pain. Today, more targeted neuromodulation tools exist, like spinal cord stimulators and nerve implants. Electricity remained in pain medicine, but the wild whole-brain approach mostly receded. Cold water immersion baths to harden patients against pain. Step into icy water every morning, doctors said, and your complaints might quiet. 19th century European sanatoriums embraced hydrotherapy as a cure-all for nervous conditions. Patients with migraines, neuralgia, or vague aches were dunked in frigid plunge baths. The shock response, shivering, and rapid breathing were interpreted as the body toughening. Some programs paired cold baths with strict schedules, walks, and bland vegetarian diets. Diary entries describe patients dreading the bell that signaled yet another immersion. A few swore long-term exposure reduced their sensitivity to daily discomfort. Others simply learned to endure the ritual until discharge or family rescue. Cold water therapy survives today mostly in extreme wellness trends and sports recovery routines. Radical tooth extractions for migraines, thought to come from jaws. When doctors couldn't find the source of head pain, they looked lower. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, focal infection theory took hold. Some physicians believed hidden dental infections triggered systemic illnesses, including migraines and arthritis. Patients with stubborn headaches were referred to dentists for aggressive extractions. Perfectly healthy teeth sometimes came out simply because they seemed suspicious. Photographs show rows of pulled teeth kept as eerie trophies of thorough work. Many patients saw no improvement and now faced chewing problems on top. Critics slowly convinced colleagues that correlation didn't equal causation in these cases. Today, dentists still treat real dental pain, but migraines rarely lose teeth anymore. Branding arthritic knees with hot coins to scar away pain. In some folk traditions, pain relief meant leaving a literal mark behind. Healers heated metal coins or small irons, then pressed them onto aching joints. The resulting circular burns and scars were considered proof of treatment's seriousness. Patients with arthritic knees or shoulders underwent repeated branding sessions over months. The intense surface pain supposedly distracted from deep joint throbbing and stiffness. Families sometimes recognized each other's burn patterns like badges of endurance and hope. Infection, of course, was a constant risk, especially without sterile tools or bandaging. As clinics and anti-inflammatory drugs spread, people quietly abandoned these extreme rituals. Old photographs occasionally reveal faint, round scars that once stood for stubborn courage. Pricking skin with stingray spines as proto-acupuncture pain relief. Long before fine steel needles, some coastal cultures turned to the sea for tools. Archaeologists studying ancient Maya sites found stingray spines associated with ritual bloodletting. These sharp, venomous barbs pierced skin during ceremonies linked to both pain and healing. Iconography suggests elites used them deliberately on tongues, ears, and limbs. While religious meaning dominated, some participants described trance states and reduced chronic suffering. Elsewhere, pointed fish bones or stones played similar roles in early acupuncture-like practices. Over time, these crude implements evolved into refined, standardized needles in East Asia. Today's acupuncture clinics look sterile compared with ancient riverbank or temple setups. Yet the basic idea remains: tiny, targeted punctures might influence how bodies process pain. Hanging heavy weights from limbs to stretch and relieve pain. If a joint hurt, one historical instinct was simple: pull it apart. In various eras, doctors used traction devices with weights to stretch painful limbs. They hung sandbags from ankles or wrists to correct alignment and decompress nerves. For spinal issues, patients lay on boards while counterweights tugged their bodies lengthwise. Some early orthopedic surgeons swore this reduced pressure on inflamed vertebrae and discs. Patients sometimes experienced temporary relief, along with bruises and numbness from straps. Improvised home versions used bricks, belts, and hooks attached to rafters. Modern traction is more controlled, but free-hanging weight cures are discouraged. They show how intuitively people reach for the idea of undoing compression. Prayers plus whipping the back to appease painful demons. Not all pain treatments aimed at the body. Many targeted the soul. In medieval Christian Europe, self-flagellation spread as a form of penance and discipline. Some also struggled with chronic pain and saw suffering as spiritually cleansing. If headaches or joint aches eased afterward, they credited divine acceptance, not physiology. Religious leaders sometimes warned against excess, but dramatic displays drew huge crowds. When plagues struck, flagellant groups intensified their rituals, hoping God would relent. Over time, church authorities cracked down on unsanctioned extremes and secretive brotherhoods. Today, historians analyze these practices as complex mixes of faith, psychology, and bodily pain. Wearing wolf teeth amulets to ward off rheumatism and cramps. In many cultures, the line between medicine and magic was comfortably blurry. Archaeologists find wolf teeth drilled and strung as amulets in graves across Eurasia. Classical writers like Pliny described wolf canines protecting children from fear and teething pain. Later European folklore extended their powers to ward off cramps and joint aches. People wore the teeth on cords under clothes, close to skin or heart. Hunters sometimes chose the largest canine from a particularly feared animal. Even when herbs and salves were used, the amulet stayed as backup protection. Skeptics saw only superstition, but believers pointed to lucky escapes and eased stiffness. Modern jewelry still borrows the look, though most buyers skip the medical claims. Hammering a nail into a tree to transfer toothache pain. Here, the patient's pain supposedly traveled into wood, one hammer blow at a time. European and American folklore described toothache trees, marked with countless driven nails. Sufferers scratched their aching gum with a nail until a little blood appeared. Then they hammered that same nail deep into the bark, often at night. Silence was crucial. Many traditions insisted the ritual failed if anyone spoke. Some versions specified phases of the moon or particular tree species for success. If the ache faded later, people said the tree had accepted the pain. Old oaks and beeches near villages sometimes bristled with rusted, half-swallowed nails. Today, those stories fascinate anthropologists as examples of transferring illness to another object. Drinking vinegar and gunpowder cocktails before crude battlefield surgeries. When proper anesthesia wasn't available, soldiers reached for whatever dulled fear fastest. Accounts from early modern wars mention mixtures of spirits, vinegar, and gunpowder. Men downed the harsh concoction just before amputations or bullet removals. The burning drink created a rapid rush of heat, bitterness, and dizziness. Some believed gunpowder itself had special powers against infection and stabbing pain. Surgeons often didn't argue. Anything that kept a patient from bolting was welcome. Later medical writers largely dismissed these cocktails as placebos with extra toxicity. Yet in chaotic battlefield conditions, placebo plus strong alcohol sometimes counted as enough. Modern military medicine instead relies on carefully dosed, tested pain medications and anesthesia. Sleeping under tar plaster poultices glued across the chest. For stubborn chest pain or deep cough, some families reached for sticky black goo. Tar-based plasters were spread on cloth and pressed onto skin over lungs. The resinous smell filled bedrooms while patients tried to fall asleep beneath them. Heat from the body helped soften the tar, making it cling even tighter. People believed the drawing power pulled inflammation, phlegm, and pain outward through skin. Removing the plaster in the morning sometimes hurt almost as much as coughing. Marks of redness or blisters were interpreted as proof the remedy worked. With time, mustard, flaxseed, and onion poultices replaced heavy tar in many homes. Eventually, inhalers, antibiotics, and regulated chest rubs pushed these messy plasters aside. Stuffing herbal wool into cavities as temporary toothache plugs. Before quick dental appointments, people improvised strangely creative fillings for ruined teeth. One common approach was packing cavities with wool soaked in herbal infusions. Garlic, clove, or bitter barks were brewed, then squeezed onto tiny tufts. The wool acted like a sponge, holding medicine directly against exposed nerves. Patients bit down carefully, hoping the plug stayed in place overnight. Sometimes the taste was so intense they drooled or swallowed constantly while waiting. Dentists eventually started using cotton and professional antiseptics in similar temporary dressings. Later still came permanent fillings, crowns, and root canal techniques replacing improvised plugs. Looking back, herbal wool sits halfway between folk magic and modern dental science. Inhaling opium or cannabis fumes for labor and surgery pain. Long before modern anesthesia, some of history's strongest plants filled operating rooms. Ancient texts from Egypt, Greece, and Asia describe opium poppy as a surgical aid. Patients drank tinctures or inhaled smoke to dull awareness before cutting began. Women in several cultures used cannabis preparations during childbirth to ease contractions. Mixtures of opium, wine, and aromatic herbs sometimes served as early anesthetic cocktails. Descriptions mention half-conscious states where people groaned less and remembered little. Dosing was unpredictable. Too little left them screaming, too much risked death. Nevertheless, these plant-based methods were huge steps beyond pure restraint and prayer. They paved the way for safer, measured anesthetics that transformed how humans experience surgical pain.